Sitting is not my nature.
Stand up. I mean, I stand up.
No. I'm gonna try. We're gonna try something new, Zach.
We'll see. If it goes
Stretch
poorly,
our,
then we'll stand up
stretch
next
our
time.
boundaries.
It's good to see everybody out this evening. Go ahead and open up Genesis chapter 38. Genesis chapter 37, excuse me. Genesis 38 will be included, but we're starting in Genesis 37, so we've got to get to 37 before we get to 38. A brief word before we have our opening prayer. We find ourselves again kind of in a very serious situation with friends and brethren and loved ones that we want to take a special moment to intercede on their behalf. Dennis had told me that David Haley was put in a regular room today. Shortly after being there, he ended up having a heart attack, and they moved him back down into SICU. So his condition is again very serious. So we want to offer a special prayer for him. Buddy Bethay is going to be having a triple bypass here in the next few days. So we want to remember him and pray for the hands that will be tending to him, and just ask the Lord to watch over them and that family. And then David Long, I believe, was put on hospice health care today. So he just doesn't have real long at this point. So comfort and peace certainly found, though, in his life and in his faith. So, yes, Dennis? Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's, for those who may not have made that connection, and I think probably most everyone here knows, that's David Haley. David Long is David Haley's son-in-law. Okay, and so his wife is dealing with her father's very serious health situation, her husband's terminal health complications, and so a very stressful time to be in. And certainly, so we want to pray just for God to be with all of them and for His will to be done and for His peace and comfort to be found, especially for those who are dealing with the hardships of those circumstances. So I'm going to pray before our Bible class. Andrew, if you would, to lead us in that prayer, please.
Father, we come to you tonight, bring before you the concerns that we have, not just of ourselves, but of our brethren, particularly the three that have just been mentioned who are facing very serious physical health issues. We pray for Buddy Bethay, who will be undergoing very serious surgery, that you would be with those who are tending to him, that his recovery would be what his family hopes that it will be, as smooth as possible and as full as possible. Father, you know how the body works better than any doctor and any specialist, and we know that you control what goes on in any health crisis more than any of us on the earth. We pray that you would be with the Bethay family and comfort them as they tend to Mr. Buddy's issues. We pray for the Haley Long family. We know that these two men and that family are facing extremely serious situations now, very critical. Father, we don't know what to do in this building. We don't have the medical expertise to help or the knowledge by which we can share with somebody that's caring for him or either of them that would help in the best way. But we bring before you our petition because we know that you have all wisdom. Your thoughts are not ours. We pray that you would heal those men if it's your will. But we know that your will is best and we trust your will. Father, as you look down and see those that are suffering, we know that you have compassion over them. We pray that you would have compassion over their family. And whatever lies in the days ahead, that you would comfort those that need to be comforted, that you would give them perseverance and character as they go through these trials that certainly are ongoing right now and will likely continue over the next few days, if you would. Father, we ask that you would help those that experience crisis to have the best benefit out of that crisis. That is to look to you more firm, strong. That maybe they would see in their lives where they can be better servants of yours, because if we are servants of you, and we serve you, and we trust you, we can all be with them place where our bodies will never fail us. Father, we're thankful for your love and for Christ Jesus that makes that possible. In his name that we pray this prayer.
Amen. Thank you, Andrew. As tragic as those situations are, far more tragic to be in them without Christ. Through Christ, we can endure whatever suffering we may have to in this life, and carries us through death into eternity. So there's certainly peace in knowing that that our God hears prayer, answers prayer, and works in the life of His people. So, all right, we're going to do something we haven't done in a while.
All right, yeah, it's been a few weeks, so we're gonna cover that up, Zach.
Oh,
I thought you had them set to do it one at a time. I'm
No.
sorry.
Next time I'll have
so,
it available.
Will and I were in the car this morning, and Will had a little early morning comedy because he got to hear me try to say the 17 periods. I don't know about you, but if I go a week or two without rehearsing them, I get them jumbled up, and Egyptian bondage is always trying to come back in there. So let's start the class tonight by saying them. We'll say them all together. Before the flood, the flood,
scattering of the people, patriarchs, the Exodus, wandering in the wilderness, invasion and conquest, judges, united kingdom, divided kingdom, Judah alone, Judah in captivity, return from captivity, years of silence, life of Christ, early church, and letters to the Christians.
All right, how many of y'all did that with no bobbles? It's funny up here because you watch people's faces, and there's some folks that, and me included, that bobbled exercise to work back in every time, just every now and then, just to make sure we stay fresh on it. So I was really excited to get to sign up for this section in particular because I think in the Joseph narrative, you really start to see some themes that have been repeated, but it seems so explicit in the Joseph narrative. And to me, there's two big takeaways, at least for chapter 37. And that's first, how long was Joseph in Egypt, separated from his family? Did anybody, because I had to teach this, I went back and did. He was down there for 20 years. He was 17 when they sell him, right, in chapter 32:2 or 37:2. He's 30 when he's gone through all his trials and he's placed over Egypt. And then there's the 7 years of plenty, and it's during the famine. So it's 37-ish years.
I think they're 2 years into the famine, the famine, because he tells us, when he sends his brothers back, he's like, hey, there's 5 more years of this. Y'all go get Dad and come back down here.
Okay. So really probably
22 years.
22 years, where you think about the things that Joseph went through at being sold and then sold again, and then he ends up in Potiphar's house, and it seems to be working in his favor, and then he's in a prison, and the continual suffering, and how many times there must have been a temptation to feel like, I've just been abandoned, right? But did God ever abandon him? No, and I think that's one of the big takeaways is just because there's trial and just because there's suffering, God may be working through that suffering, right? Could we say that of Paul in his imprisonments? And could you say that in your own life where you look back now and see times where there were trials, but those trials were working for good? I mean, James chapter 1 talks about that, right?
That seems to be the very nature of faith, is that we put our confidence in God when we can't see His presence. And what I mean by that is more clearly we can see God's working. And Joseph, in those good moments and I mean, for Joseph, it's like a roller coaster. Something bad happens, and then something good happens, and then something, you get rugs yanked out from under him, with Potiphar's wife, and then he gets in prison, but then he finds favor with the guards, and it seems like he's going to get out after he interprets the dreams, and they forget about him for 2 years. And so it's up and down, and it's up and down, and that's the nature of faith, is that it's able to see the presence of God, although the presence of God may not be clearly visible. And you often hear that expressed in the psalmist, God's got His face turned away from me. And that's what it seems like. If you've been there, you know what that's like, what that feels like. But faith, continues to hold on to God in those dark nights and continues to trust in the Lord, knowing that the sun's going to rise at some point in time in the morning.
It allows us to trust even when we don't fully understand what's happening, right, Lauren?
That looking back over the trials that we learned that God might seem far away at that point in time. go through trials later and continue through trials. You might be being tested and having to go through the trial. And that's how our faith increases.
And you see the same thing in Jacob, who is gone from his family for 21 years. You see the same thing in Abraham, who's promised a son, and it's 25 years, give or take, until that son comes. So that's one big takeaway from tonight's lesson in particular to me is that persevering and trusting through the trial is what separates Joseph. The other big picture is in this part of the story in particular, we really see God's provision at play. Why did he send the 70 to Egypt? Was it because there was no food?
Part of it, but there's
I
a bigger,
mean,
there's a bigger
yeah,
reason.
that was the immediate, but what was the real purpose in sending them to
Chapter
Egypt?
38 is going to make that clear, I think.
Sir?
Chapter 38 is going to make that clear, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was to protect them and create a position where they were siloed so that they could stay, or really become a people down there, right?
I mean, we saw them nearly assimilate just the previous chapter. I mean, with the incident with Shechem and Hamor.
Well, and you see it with Judah in chapter 37 tonight. So I just thought those were two things to kind of frame up at the beginning of that chapter. So Zach, you want to jump into the questions?
Sure. Question 1, how was Joseph set apart by his father from his other brothers?
Receiving coat of any color, bearing color too.
Okay.
It's that favoritism put to the above.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So we're introduced to Joseph. He is 17 years old, and he's not real popular with his brothers. As we're going to see, there are going to be some events that occur. In fact, chapter 2 kind of shows us that there's a little tension between them when we see he was out keeping the sheep with his with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, and it says he brings a bad report to his father about them. We don't know what it was. We don't know if he was there for some reconnaissance or if he just was tattling, like a younger brother might have a tendency to do. But he brings back a bad report, and that kind of just irks him, and there's going to be a lot of tension arising with Joseph and his brothers.
Andrew?
He's Rachel, he's that favorite.
Well, and one of the things I read that to me is kind of an interesting little thought is that the coat of many colors was probably a very ornate, it was not go work in the fields and watch sheep. It was an ornate, it was fancy clothes. So what does it say about Joseph that when he goes to the field, he's wearing this very ornate? Yeah, I mean, it's not. Yeah, it's not modest. Maybe Joseph, as a young man, enjoys that position of favor, right?
He's supervisor essentially. I think that's kind of the idea behind it. It's not working clothes. It's and I did some reading. And ordinarily, the firstborn would be given something like this, and it would be demonstrative of the fact that they're going to be the future leader of the family. And one of the things Scripture teaches us, and this is in 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, is Joseph receives the birthright, if you will. That is that double portion. And that's why we have this strange account later where when Israel is in Egypt, he calls Joseph and says, "Bring your sons to me." And he blesses Ephraim and Manasseh, and he says, "Your sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, they're going to be like my sons." And so that's the sense in which Joseph receives the birthright. So rather than just one tribe being attributed to him, Ephraim and Manasseh are taken into the family of Israel as Israel's sons. And so that's the sense in which he receives the birthright. Now, Judah's going to receive a separate blessing, but Joseph does receive that, and it kind of coincides with how we see Israel treating Joseph throughout the narrative, especially here early.
Yeah, I think so.
It's because of this favoritism. Jacob is the source of Joseph's promise, according to verse 4. It's because that he was the favorite and because of how he was treated. And so a lot of times, and we do see some instances where Joseph brings a little bit of that on himself, but it started with his father.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what important point to glean from verse 4.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and this favoritism doesn't just start right here. It goes back even predating, Jacob and Rachel, to Rebekah, who favored Jacob, and Isaac who favored Esau. So, I mean, that seems to be handed down, and you just see the tension that is creating in the family. And I think that's going to be a discussion question at some point in time that we may linger on. I don't know.
Yeah.
See.
All right, we'll go to the next one. All right, what was Joseph's relationship with his brothers like? We talked about that a little bit already, right? And certainly I think you can see maybe some immaturity on Joseph's part in choosing to wear the coat. We'll talk in a second about the relaying of the dream. But what were the words that were used to describe how his brothers felt? Hated twice, right? Jealous. My version said they envied him, and I thought it was an interesting word, so I went and looked at it. That word actually carries the idea of, if I can find where I wrote it down, it carries the idea of provoked to zealous anger, but in a negative sense, not like defending your wife or something like that, but it's used in several places throughout Scripture. But it's used in Deuteronomy 32:16 to describe how God feels about idolatry. That's how the response they felt. And then back in Genesis 30:11, it's the word that Rachel used when she saw Leah having children and how she felt about it. So you think about the deep animosity and bitterness that they felt toward Joseph. And as we talked about, it was really Jacob's fault, right?
Mm-hmm.
Andrew?
Think about how many people ever in your life you have not been able to speak to people. Hopefully that's very, very, very rare, if not none. But his own brothers don't.
Yeah. Okay. All right. What were the two dreams? Hudson? Yeah. So gathering sheaves in the field, his stands upright, the brothers, the other 11 bow down to him. And then what's the second dream? Yeah. Second, we've got 11 brothers, so we've got there, but now we've thrown mom and dad into the mix too, right? What are your Zach, what are your thoughts about? I think that's an interest, again, between the coat of many colors and telling these dreams, I think it's an interesting glimpse into Joseph. And I think it's an opportunity to see, even in Joseph, that really Scripture never says anything bad. There's growth in him. Luke?
Surely he's aware of how his brothers feel about it. This is not something that he tries to hide.
Mm-hmm.
And so with him saying these things, either he's just willfully ignorant or just ignorant of how this is going to affect his brothers. Now, there's times where people have had dreams and they've kept it to themselves to see if they become true. Well, he doesn't do that. He doesn't show the discretion to keep this in mind for later, but I think it was important to the grand plan for them to know. But that's, I think if he was an older man and more mature, he probably would have thought on that, but not stirred the pot worse.
Wouldn't we all say that as you've gotten older, you realize that sometimes just because you know something and just because it's true doesn't mean you necessarily should say it? And I think we get a picture into a little bit of discernment on the part of Joseph. And I think we get to see him grow as a result. Because in contrast, in verse 11, Jacob gets onto him along with his brother. They rebuked him, but he hides it in his heart, right? He holds on to it because he recognizes this is something. And so I think that's interesting. I think that's an interesting note.
Lance?
This is what God's told me. This is what's going to happen. David rebukes him, and I'm certain when we throw it down to Egypt, bow down. I was like, oh.
Yeah.
I think the same thing Samuel and Eli did vision, you just kind of stay.
Yeah.
And I think there is that's a good point to realize. Is that one we're to understand that God is communicating to Joseph in dreams, and that's going to tie into the story later on whenever Pharaoh starts having these dreams. That being said, telling the brothers that couldn't speak peaceably to him, probably, as you said, it wasn't the wisest tact. But that being said, communicating it to Dad, I think that would have been maybe, hey, Dad, I need to tell you something, and then that could have been handled maybe in a better way if it was coming from Jacob. And I think that we don't need to miss that detail, that while the brothers just hated him more, Jacob rebuked him, but it says he held on to those things. He kept them in mind because God had communicated to him through dreams. And so he recognizes, okay, you need to keep your mouth shut, but there may be some truth to this, And so he's willing to leave open the door that there's more to this than meets the eye. I think the difference in those two situations was, as Pharaoh particularly, as Pharaoh was looking for the meaning, versus on the other, Jacob just throws it out here and dumps on them like, hey guys, I had this awesome dream. Your sheaves are bowing down to mine. And so I do think there is something to be said, though, about making known what God has revealed, as well. But perhaps in a more discretionary way would have been handled better. Maybe letting Jacob in on that and then allowing him to dispense that knowledge in a way that would have perhaps been better received.
Maybe not saying it out in the field with just his brothers around
Yeah.
initially, So I think both of those points can coexist because
Yeah.
you need to have courage to tell the truth, but you also sometimes it's about the timing, right?
Mhm.
Timing matters
And
tremendously.
the way you communicate that.
Yeah.
And I think you just see probably youthful ignorance, just not having the discretion that age will, bring about.
Yeah.
I think probably Leah.
Oh, maybe
Just
so.
representatively of people who were in a higher position than him in regard to the family structure. That's kind of how I see it. So, just the authority figures in his life, he was being exalted over them. For that matter, we don't know that Leah makes. Are we told that Leah makes the trip to Egypt? Because if that's the case, then that probably, I would think it more specifically would apply to her as the matriarch of the family at that point in time. So I just kind of see it's symbolically representing mother and father and brothers. And so he's kind of being elevated over the rest of his family. I don't know that it has anyone specific in mind. So I think that's, anyway.
Yeah.
All right, so in verses 12 through 17, the brothers are out pasturing their father's flocks near Shechem, and Jacob sends Joseph out to kind of check on them. We don't know if historically they were untrustworthy or if it's been a while and he just wants to say, hey, do they need anything? So he sends Joseph out, and Joseph wanders around, gets to Shechem, can't find him there. There's some guys that saw him pastor and said, hey, they're headed to Dothan. So he travels to Dothan, and it says in verse 17 that he meets up with them there. And that's when things are going to kind of take a turn.
Okay, so they see him coming in the distance in his coat of many colors, right?
Not hiding, not
Easily
sneaking up on anybody in that
identifiable.
thing,
That's
is he?
right. It's like safety green. What did Joseph's brothers conspire? What was their initial plan? Yeah, I mean, they hated him, right? To the point that they were ready to kill him. So let's kill him, and then who intercedes? Reuben. What's Reuben's intent? Right. Lance, to your point, should this been a situation where the eldest brother said, hey, y'all, this ain't right? I mean, this is a time where he went for maybe discretion, maybe sneaky, maybe he was trying to play both against the middle, maybe he had his own animosity toward Joseph, but he recognizes that they're about to step off into something, but he's trying to be tricky, right? And it backfires on him.
Maybe he lacked the courage to just oppose his brothers outright and said, "Hey guys, this is wrong. We haven't got any business doing this." Or yeah, I do have to wonder about Reuben's motive, right? Do you think Reuben's on good terms with his dad? It's the last thing we heard about Reuben. He made a big mistake. He went and slept with one of his father's concubines, Bilhah or Zilpah. I forget which one exactly it was. But I'm wondering if maybe Reuben's kind of trying to get back in Dad's good books.
Maybe.
Because we know that, come the end of the book when Jacob is handing out the blessings, Reuben's blessing is not favorable. But at the very least, he didn't have the courage to oppose him outrightly. But then again, they're talking about killing Joseph. You can throw two in the pit just as easy as you can throw one in, right?
That's true. That's true.
So maybe a little bit of self-preservation, in mind. But with that being said, Reuben's going to be the one that's accountable as the oldest. And so if something happens to Joseph, Reuben, why didn't you do anything? That was your responsibility as the oldest.
Well, it would not be out of the norm for this family to be guilty of scheming and trying to twist their way through things.
It would actually be very consistent with what they've done in the past.
I think there's a little detail that's worth pointing out that speaks to the severity of the hatred that Joseph's brothers feel to him. In verse 25, they throw him in the pit, and then what do they do? They sit down and have a meal like it's Tuesday afternoon, right? What do you imagine Joseph was doing while he was down in that pit?
Yeah.
Probably. He probably, maybe at first, hoped it was a joke, like, hey, y'all get me out of here. Then maybe he went, if you don't get me out of here, I'm going to tell Dad. But at some point, fear and panic are likely to take over.
The brothers allude to this later, I think, when they're in Egypt. And they say something to the effect of, like, the Lord is paying us back because we let his cries fall on deaf ears.
Yeah.
And so Joseph, he's probably screaming bloody murder, He knows these guys hate him. And so he does not suspect this to end well for him. And it just callously falls on their ears. They sit, as he's screaming in the pit for help, they're sitting down eating a meal,
That's right.
So it just shows the hard-heartedness that they have toward him.
It sure does.
It's true.
He could have been, for sure.
Yeah,
But I don't know about y'all, but it is one of those things that's very shocking to me, even in the world, even among worldly people, is somebody that can sit there and callously watch another human being suffer.
Well, think about what Simeon and Levi did, though.
Right.
These are some pretty hard-hearted dudes.
Yeah.
So, and the Lord's going to work on them. I think, we see Joseph transformed. We're going to see Judah being transformed more than I think any of the brothers. But I think you see a sense of penitence in them all.
I think in all of them you see growth over the course of their lives.
Mm-hmm. That's it.
Yeah. That's dirty. We are never going to get through all this.
Oh, just keep on rolling.
All right, so what are we on? Number 5. What did the brothers do to Joseph at Judah's suggestion? What was his plan?
Well, yeah. I can just hear it, He is our brother, so let's sell him. Let's not kill him,
Yeah. Who did they sell him? Who did Judah and his brothers sell him to? Yeah, the Ishmaelites. Some passages says Midianites, and I had to go back and do some digging. But who were the Midianites? Yeah, they were the descendants of it. So sort of distant cousins, right? I wonder if there was any part where Judah thought, hey, this is better than killing him, and we're kind of selling him at least to some kin folks. It won't be that bad. But then what do they turn around and do? Sell him to the Egyptians, which would be completely foreign.
It's kind of interesting to see, when you look at the law that Moses gives, a lot of things that he explicitly forbids are things this family did. So it's just like, we're going to go back in the family tree and find out all the mistakes our ancestors made. Those are the things that are being forbidden. Kidnapping is being forbidden. Married sisters is being forbidden. Taking more than one wife. All of these things are, many of the mistakes that the forefathers made are forbidden, come the law of Moses being given. So at Judah's suggestion, they sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites, and that's how he makes his way down to Egypt eventually. That being said, the brothers they've got to come up with a cover-up story. So having taken its coat, they kind of shred it up and dip it in animal blood, take it back to Jacob, and say, hey, we found this out in the wilderness. Do you recognize it? And he believes it to be Joseph. He knows it's Joseph's coat, so he believes Joseph had been torn apart by a wild animal. And he begins to grieve. And I tell you, again, you talk about the hard-heartedness of the brothers. There's a verse 35 of chapter 37. So as he's in mourning over the perceived loss of Joseph, all his sons and daughters rose up to comfort him. And so can you just imagine? They know Joseph is alive, but yet they're in that moment trying to comfort him when he believes that Joseph has been killed. And so again, just the depth of hatred that these guys had for Joseph, you see that reiterated repeatedly in the story. So, and then the very last verse, the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard.
So one of the other takeaways to me from this part of the story in particular is you look at Reuben, who tried to split the middle, and that sinful choice, rather than refuting his brothers, rather than standing up for what was right, it had consequences well beyond what he imagined, right? And then you have Judah, who say, let's sell him to these guys. It'll be okay. And it turned out to be far worse than they imagined. And then even in Jacob's case, I mean, Jacob is a deceiver, right? Early on in his life, and what happens to him now by his own children?
In the same nature that he deceived his father with this garment, thus he's deceived, about his son with the garment.
You think when he realized everything, besides being overjoyed that Joseph was alive, like the irony of that may have struck him at some point. The apple doesn't always fall too far from the tree. So, and I think I know Billy talks about that sometimes, is sin promises it just wants to take you here, but it always takes you way down here, right, Crawford? Yeah, that's true.
And they thought that they were going to stop Joseph's dreams, and that's one of the statements they make when they say we're going to kill him is, we'll see what happens to his dreams. And so they're thinking they're going to squash the dream, when in actuality they're going to fulfill the dream, right? So, and it's not so much Joseph that they're fighting against, it's God, because this is God's plan to get him down there, and they're acting against the Lord.
That's right.
So.
Who gave him access to his safety there. But as we'll see, go through the story, everywhere he goes, particularly at Potiphar's house, it prospers under his hand. Because God is with him in every step of this process.
One under Pharaoh, right? I mean, it's not an overstatement to say Joseph saved that part of the world due to that famine by the plan with the 7 years of plenty and then having grain made Pharaoh rich.
I think he makes that statement. He says, God sent me down here to save many lives.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't just his brothers that were being preserved, but more expansively, it was all of Egypt and the others in that part of the world that were under that famine that were seeking grain in Egypt. So.
Chapter 38.
Let's go.
All right. Chapter 38, we jump in here and we see some of Judah. You see Judah's story arc. What were the names of Judah's three sons? Yeah, Onan, and Shelah. Tell me about I think that's question 7. What did God do to and Onan? Why did he kill them?
Well, we know what Onan did.
We know what Onan did. He
did
not honor the obligations.
Yeah, it just said he was evil in the sight of the Lord, and God killed him.
That's right.
That being said, when you read Jesus' genealogy in Matthew 1, there are quite a few characters in there, unsavory characters in there. But that being said, there was a strong Canaanite connection to these. And this is, like you're pointing out, Crawford, one of the things that God is wanting to accomplish is a separateness, right, from them. So I think, God's just working this out, and he's going to accomplish this the way he intends. And so,
okay.
One thing here that's important to notice is, what kind of woman did Judah marry? Canaanite. Yep, he went down to wherever it was. He left his family and marries a Canaanite woman. So that was a big no-no as to how you look at how the patriarchs handled their marriages and the arranging of relationships for their children.
Well, and I think we'll see that at the end. Had they remained in Canaan, God's providence was at play. But had they remained in Canaan, there was a pattern. They were marrying the Canaanite women around them. There's every likelihood that Abraham's family just would have been absorbed among the people around them had they stayed. So God sent them someplace where they could grow and become the people that God promised Abraham. Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It could be. Well, and Abraham was told to be a pilgrim in the land, so maybe that was part of it too. Okay. Question 9. All right. How did Tamar deceive her father-in-law, which led to her then having twins, right? Yeah. That's an interesting progression, right? Because it seems like Judah watches be killed, then he watches Onan be killed, and he says to Tamar, "Hey, go back to your dad's house until Shula is grown, and then I'll give him to fulfill our family's responsibility." Right? Does he have any intention of doing that? Doesn't seem to. It almost seems like he's kind of putting her out of sight, out of mind. Like, let's just get her down the road, and she'll forget about us, and we'll forget about her.
He thinks she's the reason that they're dead. And that shows you, I think, something to Judah's lack of spiritual insight is rather than seeing the wickedness of his sons and them being judged for their sins, he blames Tamar for it. And so in an attempt, wrongfully, to protect his youngest son and his name not being blotted out entirely, he sends her back home with no intention at all of ever allowing her him to father a child.
Well, and that plays into the deception to some degree, because in verse 14 it explicitly says that she saw that Shula was grown. So where's he been? Judah should have called for her and brought her back and allowed Shila to keep his responsibilities.
Yeah.
So she dresses as a harlot. She becomes pregnant.
By Judah.
By Judah, correct. So she gets the heir, right? She gets the heir, and Tamar's actually in the lineage of Jesus.
And a very wise move on her behalf after that. He's going to send payment later. So she says, "Give me a pledge," and she asks for his signet and his cord. So think of it like his driver's license, his identification, essentially. That was the pledge that he was going to send the payment later on.
It was guaranteed paternity, right? It was an ancient Israel paternity test. So what does when that comes out, what was Judah's response? You remember?
Mm-hmm.
Before that, what was his initial response when she turned out to be pregnant?
Bring her out.
Let her be burned, right? And then when she says, "Whose are these?"
Yeah, I'm pregnant by the man to whom this belongs.
Yeah. And to the point of Judah's growth, does that remind you of anybody else in the same family lineage?
He's got a certain king.
Certain king. Okay, maybe just me. Nobody else felt a ripple of David and Bathsheba with that, who was very much condemning until Nathan said, "You're the man." And we immediately saw David's penance. And I think we see that here with Judah too, because once she holds up the signet and the cord, what's his response?
Yeah.
She's more righteous.
I don't think that's morally righteous necessarily, because both of them were, acting in a way that they shouldn't morally. But in regard to that obligation that Judah had to give his youngest son to her to propagate a child for his oldest son, he failed to do that, and so she intervened. Thus, in regard to having children, she was in the right and he was in the wrong. I think that's that you were more righteous than I was. Neither one of them were morally righteous, but I think that's what's intended there.
On the whole Joseph narrative is kind of a conversion.
Mm-hmm.
By the end of the story, Genesis 49, the blessing Judah received is that his brothers will bow down to him. And so you see, going from the point of selling Joseph into slavery to the one that did self-sacrifice, bloody Benjamin Reed,
Right.
which is not the only person from the tribe of Judah that did self-sacrificial.
Well, and we've talked about that with Abraham, and we've talked about that with Isaac. I mean, God uses broken people to work out his will, and he grows those broken people by trusting in him and getting up and going again and learning to trust. Somebody had their hand up.
Al? Oh.
Baylor? Yeah. That's fair. But we also do see fruit of repentance in Judah's life as well, right? So it echoes. Al?
That's very interesting. There was a TV show years ago, where one of the main characters was talking to a young girl about the way she dresses. And he said, "You are advertising." And one of these days, somebody's going to answer that ad. This is obvious to me. And to me, it starts with two boys. And we read that quite so much. But the dad, Stephen Watts, what the daughters were married because they're advertising. And then I think about that a little bit.
Tamar was really intentional about her and her purpose, right? Yeah.
So the section kind of concludes with something I think that's kind of relevant, easy to look over. So, Tamar conceives and she has twins. Something kind of weird happens as she's giving birth. One of the babies, the two boys, one of the babies reaches his hand out. Nurse ties a scarlet cord around it because he was the one that came out first, so we can distinguish between the two, later. But it kind of gets pulled back in, and the other one comes out first. And so Perez is the one who was born first. Zerah is the one who was born second. And so you kind of have, this takes us back to the Isaac-Rebecca narrative where you've got twins that are struggling against one another. One appears to have gained the upper hand, but the other one actually is the one that gains it, where Esau, being the oldest, seemed to have gained it, but Jacob usurps that. And so then you get later to the genealogy of Matthew, and Perez struggled with Zerah and overcame him because he's the one that goes from Judah and Tamar to Perez, and then it follows his lineage rather than that of his brothers. And so kind of an easy story to overlook, but in the big picture of the Bible, very significant because we find him in Matthew chapter 1. He's the one that emerges victorious over his brother, if you will. You have anything else for chapter 38?
I don't.
Anybody else have anything for 38? So this kind of seems like, and we don't have but just a second left. This kind of seems like a strange place to insert this, because the Joseph narrative has begun, but all of a sudden the Judah Tamar story is stuck there right in the middle. Any thoughts on why that might be? Because chapter 39 we're going to be following Joseph. So why might Moses have put this in here? Any thoughts? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. Okay, I think that's a big part of it, because we need to understand some of these details as the rest of Genesis is going to unfold, and you see the emergence of Judah over his brothers. Crawford? Mm-hmm.
So all of these things help to illustrate Israel's mind, what they're going, why they're
Right.
going
Right, absolutely. And for very immediate reasons, we have here a very clear case of sexual immorality. What are we going to see in chapter 39, the very next chapter with Joseph? We'll see sexual integrity, right? And so you have here the negative example, and you have here the positive example. And I don't think you can miss those two things being connected when you look at the actions of Judah and his immorality, and then the actions of Joseph and his purity, just as those are kind of set back to back. But certainly there are some bigger picture things that were brought out. So anyway, thank you for your thoughts and your attention in our class tonight.